Good morning, everyone. We'll get started now. Thank you for attending today's virtual session regarding the City of London's 2024 to 2027 multi-year budget. My name is Martin Galchinsky, and I'm with the City of London, working in the Financial Planning and Policy Office. I will be moderating today's session. Today, there will be a presentation shared on screen. Please note that for the duration of the presentation and session, you will remain muted and your video camera will be turned off. If you have a question, feel free to type it in the Zoom Q&A box at any point during this session. You should find this feature in the Zoom menu. We will be taking a couple opportunities to pause and answer questions related to the materials covered throughout the presentation. But again, we encourage you to submit a question at any time. We will also be finishing today's session with Q&A. So if you think of another question after our pauses, don't worry, we'll have more time at the end. Furthermore, we will also be providing our office's contact information at the end of the session. So if you think of any other questions after today, you can reach out to our team. Kyle Murray, Director of Financial Planning and Business Support, is our presenter today. My colleagues, Jason Davies and Alan Dunbar, also in the Financial Planning and Policy Office, are with us today, providing support to the webinar and for Q&A as needed. We hope you find this session informative, and with that, I will pass it over to Kyle to begin our presentation.
Awesome. Thanks, Martin. Appreciate the introduction, and thank you to all of you who are joining us here on a Saturday morning. Today's session is really intended to be, as I flip the slide here, a bit of a budget basics session, an introduction to the city's multi-year budget process, and we'll talk as well about kind of upcoming key dates in the process. So if any of you joined today hoping for a sneak peek at the city's 2024 to 2027 multi-year budget, sorry, you're out of luck. We're not formally releasing the multi-year budget until December the 12th. So unfortunately, today's session will not address specific elements of the upcoming budget. However, I will later in the presentation talk about how you can join us in January for further conversations and discussions on the specifics of the upcoming budget. So our agenda for today will cover a bit of an overview of our multi-year budget process and what it will look like. We'll talk about a few related processes as well that are very closely interlinked with the budget process. We'll walk through some key dates that we'll have in our budget process this year. We'll walk you through, as I mentioned, some of those information events that we'll be holding in January, how you can learn more about the specifics of the budget once it is released. And perhaps most importantly of all, we will talk about how you can get involved in the process, how you can provide your input into the multi-year budget deliberations. And as Martin said, there will, of course, be ample opportunity throughout for Q&A. So let's start with a bit of an overview of our multi-year budget process. And this might be repetitive for those of you who may have tuned in for these types of webinars in the past, but I think it's a good refresher for everyone. So, you know, why don't we start with why do we do a multi-year budget here at the City of London? And there are a number of benefits. First and foremost, likely, is that it supports putting the city's strategic plan into action. So the multi-year budget really is the resourcing mechanism to implement the city's strategic plan. A multi-year budget also supports longer-term planning. So obviously, it's not possible to do everything in 1 year, but having a multi-year budget provides a longer horizon and maybe a little bit greater clarity on when certain initiatives might move forward into the future. Certainly, a multi-year budget provides, I think, a clearer outlook for residents on future taxes, have a pretty clear sense of where taxes are going to go over the 4-year period. There's enhanced clarity on spending plan changes. I'll talk a little bit more in a minute about the annual budget update process, but that really helps to allow us to address things that might come up mid-cycle during the multi-year budget. I think a multi-year budget also certainly saves us time and resources by not requiring a yearly budget rebuild. That allows us here at the city to dedicate resources to other projects and initiatives instead of requiring not only finance staff, but also folks from across the organization to spend a significant portion of their year, every single year, doing a full budget build. And last but certainly not least, a multi-year budget supports the city's AAA credit rating. This has been specifically identified by our credit rating agency as a credit positive factor for the city. And what this does is it allows us to continue borrowing money as we need to at the lowest possible rates. So a number of benefits for us in doing a multi-year budget. So let's talk about the process itself. And here's, I think, a pretty good visual summary of the various components of the city's budget and how the components link together over the cycle. So our multi-year budget is fully integrated into our strategic planning process here at the city. Really, the strategic plan is the foundation of our multi-year budget. It dictates what the priorities are and what the strategies require resources. The strategic plan essentially sets the direction for the multi-year budget. As we all know, of course, though, resources are not unlimited. And so, at the outset of a multi-year budget cycle, Civic Administration requests council direction on a tax levy target to provide some parameters on the resources that might be available to implement the strategic plan through the multi-year budget. So that then leads into the multi-year budget itself. And there are really three components to an MYB. There's the base budget to maintain existing service levels. There are business cases for potential new or additional or expanded services. This is where perhaps additional resources are required. And there's also business cases for potential reductions. So these would be areas where perhaps fewer resources have been deemed to be necessary. So the multi-year budget really determines the pace of implementation of the strategic plan. How fast or how slow do we want to go in implementing council's priorities? Now, once the multi-year budget is approved, this leads into the annual budget update process. And this is really the opportunity for course corrections throughout the process as we need to. So these typically relate to new or changed regulations or legislation that may have come up since the approval of the multi-year budget, or new council direction that may have been provided since the approval of the multi-year budget, or perhaps unanticipated cost or revenue drivers that may have materialized or not been fully factored into the multi-year budget. So that's the multi-year budget process in a good visual nutshell. So we talk about the multi-year budget, but in fact, it's not one budget we do at the City of London, it's actually three. We have our property tax supported budget, our water budget, and our wastewater and treatment budget as well. Now, the property tax budget is primarily funded through a combination of course, property taxes, but also user fees, grants, development charges, and other funding sources as well. Now, the water and wastewater budgets, those are primarily funded through water and wastewater rates that are collected on your hydro bills. Those are collected and remitted to the city by London Hydro. Now, I want to be very clear, though, that electricity is London Hydro's responsibility. So that is not part of the city's budget. Okay, each of the three budgets, so property tax, water, and wastewater, contain an operating budget component as well as a capital budget component. Now, you can think of the operating budget as the budget to kind of provide the ongoing services and the day-to-day operations of the city. So things like salaries, materials and supplies, utility costs, those would be reflected in the operating budget. The capital budget, on the other hand, is related more to the cost of the city's infrastructure, roads, water mains, sewers, parks, recreation facilities, that sort of thing. Okay, so you don't have to listen to me for this whole presentation. We do have a brief video now that I'll play, and I think this video provides pretty good insight into how the city's budget is built. So let me try and get this going and see if we can make this work. Here we go.
Okay, I'd like to help you understand how your city develops its budget. We always hear about them, and often this can feel like another language altogether. Before we get started, there is important information you should know. Ontario cities like London receive only 9% of all taxes collected, but are responsible for over 50% of the infrastructure. Let's start by looking at what the word budget means. Simply put, it's a planned, itemized summary of money that is coming into the city and how that money is spent for a specific period of time. It's very important to note that provincial government legislation in Ontario states money coming in equals money going out, also known as revenue equals expenditures, or a balanced budget. The City of London provides more than 90 services to the citizens of London, so City Council and administration always have to make difficult decisions to ensure this balancing takes place. There are two main components of the budget when looking at the money going out side of the scale. Operating pays for all the day-to-day activities of the corporation. This includes items such as salaries and wages, utilities, supplies, fuel, and insurance, just to name a few. The capital budget pays for all the new big investments or the rehabilitation of current assets under the city's control. So let's focus on how the city collects to pay for all these services. For every dollar that comes into the city, 64 cents comes from property taxes, 21 cents from grants and subsidies, and 15 cents from user fees and other sources. So, now we've learned what a budget is, how cities collect money, and how they spend it. Now let's take a look at how these pieces work together. Money comes in through property taxes, grants and subsidies, and user fees. The money collected is required for both the operating and capital budget. We've already talked about the operating budget, including day-to-day expenses, but it also includes money for funding capital budgets. The capital budget pays for all the new big investments or the rehabilitation of current assets under the city's control. This connection is made through three methods. The capital levy method reflects a pay-as-you-go approach. The reserve fund method, which reflects a planned save now, acquire or use later approach, and the debt payment approach. Okay, so let's recap. 1. A budget is a plan for money coming in and money going out. There are two building blocks to the city budget, operating and capital. 2. The operating budget is like paying your house bills to keep the lights on. Just like in a normal household, our bills go up with inflation. 3. The capital budget is like your major outlays, vehicles, house, renovations, etc. 4. Money comes in from three sources: property tax levy, user fees, and grants and subsidies. 5. Money coming in is used to deliver over 90 services to city residents. 6. City Council and administration, with the input of the public, decide how to best balance the city budget guided by provincial legislation. And that is how your city develops its budget.
Okay. So budgeting 101 in about 3.5 minutes. So I think that was a good overview. Let's talk a little bit as well about how our budgets are structured. And we structure our budgets, all three of them, property tax, water, and wastewater, as service-based budgets. And what does that mean? Well, the focus for us is really on showing the services that are provided rather than the organizational structure of the City of London. Why do we do this? Well, it's primarily so it's easy for residents to understand what services their tax dollars are going to fund. Presenting a budget maybe on an organizational or departmental basis doesn't really provide that same level of clarity on how much specific services costs. So the budget structure is really about optimizing understandability of the budget for the reader. So once the budget is released in December, and hopefully you're going to go and spend some time reviewing it at that point, it'll be important to understand the way in which the budget is grouped. So the three groupings to remember when you're reviewing the budget are service program, service grouping, and service. And as you can see on screen, there are 10 service programs within our property tax budget, which are further broken down into about 45 or so service groupings, and then further broken down into more than 90 different services. So let's take an example, and let's use fire as the example. So fire is part of our protective services service program, and fire services is the service grouping itself, which is the next level down. If you take it down to the service level, which is yet another level down, the specific services delivered by fire are fire and rescue services, as well as fire prevention and education. Now let's go back to the protective services service program, of which fire is a part of. And you can see on this slide, there are another number of other groupings with their own services within that broader service program as well. So there's animal services, bylaw enforcement, corporate security and emergency management, and police services as well, in addition to fire, all with their unique individual services. Similarly, for the water budget, there are a number of different service groupings as well. You can see these on screen, and not surprisingly, it's a similar story for the wastewater budget, very much structured in the same service grouping and service format. So I think that's just helpful context as you're navigating the budget document. Once it's released next month, you'll be able to kind of understand how and why we group the budget the way we do. All right, as we talked about earlier, obviously there are operating and capital costs in all three of our budgets. Now, the capital budget deals with the physical assets of the city, as I mentioned earlier. These are things that are not consumed within a short period of time. So we're not talking about utilities. We're not talking about the road salt that's put on the roads in the winter. We're talking about things that provide usefulness over the long run. Roads, sewers, water mains, buildings, that sort of thing. So our capital budget has a unique, distinct categorization as well. So life cycle renewal are projects that maintain existing city assets. So you can think of this as either replacing or fixing existing equipment, existing buildings, existing infrastructure, that sort of thing. The growth category of capital is in relation to construction of new assets as the city grows. So this could be the infrastructure that goes along with a new subdivision or a new neighborhood. The service improvement category is about improving or enhancing an existing asset to improve its productive use. So this is kind of the next level beyond simply maintaining an existing asset. This is improving an existing asset. So you will see these categories within the capital budgets once they're released in December as well. So hopefully this kind of provides just some good grounding, some good context for you when you are navigating the budget in the coming weeks and months. So with an understanding of how we budget, let's watch a quick video to help us kind of understand how a property tax bill is determined.
Okay, I want to explain to you how your property taxes are calculated based on how much your home is worth. Imagine there's a town that only has 3 homes, and they're each worth a different amount. The total cost to provide all of their town's services is $1,000. This is collected through property taxes. Each homeowner pays property taxes based on how much their home is worth. So, the value of all the homes are added up and divided by the town's cost, which gives us the tax rate. This tax rate is applied to all the houses to get enough money to pay for all of the services. So, each homeowner pays according to how much their house is worth. Every 4 years, the houses are reassessed. Let's say all 3 properties have gone up equally in value. If we go back to our calculation, the total cost of services hasn't changed, but the total property value has increased. When this happens, there'll be a decrease in the tax rate. Now, when we apply that new rate on all the homes, everyone still pays the same. Let's recap. Property taxes are based on what a home is worth. If reassessments all increase equally, then everyone pays the same taxes as before. Now, let's say another 4 years has gone by and these homes are reassessed. During this time, the house on the right became more valuable in the market than the other two. Okay, so time for a little more math. The total value of all the homes have increased, which means the town has to calculate a new tax rate. With this new tax rate, the first two homes will actually pay less than the home on the right that was reassessed at a higher value. Since the cost of services hasn't changed, the town doesn't need to collect more property taxes. However, since property taxes are based on a home's value, those taxes could potentially go up or down based on the rest of the homes. So what happens when the cost to provide services goes up? Well, it means more property taxes need to be collected from every home and a new tax rate is calculated. To get the new rate, we take that amount that the town now needs and divide it by all the property values. The new rate is applied to all the homes, and now everyone has to pay the new tax amount to continue to fund all of the services. So, let's review. 1. Property taxes are based on the value of a home. When homes are reassessed equally, each homeowner will pay the same amount proportionately as before. 2. When homes are reassessed at different values, each homeowner will pay a different amount proportionately based on how much their home increased in value. 3. When the town's cost to provide services increases, a property tax increase, then everyone pays their share proportionately across the board. And that explains the relationship between property value and property taxes.
Okay, so I think that was a pretty good video illustration of how property taxes are calculated. It is a bit of a simplification, of course, because there are a lot of factors that go into determining what the tax increase is for a particular property. And there are really actually only two of the factors that are directly within the control of the City of London. So the various factors that might influence a year-over-year increase for a particular property include these 5 that I've listed here on screen. So obviously, and kind of the focus of what we're talking about here today, the council approved budget increase. How much is the budget increasing by? That is obviously within the control of the City of London. Tax policy is another factor that is within the control of the city as well. However, there are a number of factors that are completely outside of the city's control that may also influence a particular change in a property tax bill. So those factors include education tax policy, which is a provincial mandate, changes in assessed value of a particular property. Property assessments are done by MPAC, which is the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation. That's an independent, not-for-profit corporation, completely separate and outside of the City of London. Other provincial legislation may come up from time to time as well that may also impact a property tax increase or decrease for that matter. This includes introduction of new classes, requirements for the capping of increases at certain amounts, and that sort of thing. So tax policy, as the other factor aside from the budget that's within the city's control, it's well beyond the scope of today's conversation. We're not going to go down that rabbit hole today, but what you really need to know and how best to understand this is that the budget really determines the size of the pie that needs to be funded. Tax policy, on the other hand, determines how that pie will be sliced effectively between the various property classes. So there are obviously a lot of different property classes: residential, commercial, industrial, that sort of thing. Tax policy determines how the burden will be shared between those various property tax classes. Tax policy is a completely separate council decision point outside and after the budget is passed. And there are opportunities at that point for council to shift the tax burden between property classes as they so choose at that point in time. Overall, though, it's important to note that the size of the pie, which was set during the budget process, doesn't change as a result of tax policy decisions. So here's another good visual of how a tax bill is calculated. And one thing we hear quite regularly, and it's a very common misconception, is that as real estate prices rise, as they certainly have in the last number of years, my property tax bill it must be going up by the same proportionate amount. My house doubled in value, so my property taxes are going to double. Well, no, this is absolutely not correct. As I mentioned before, the budget sets the size of the pie. This is how much we need to collect. This does not change based on fluctuations in real estate prices. If house prices were to magically double overnight, we'd still need to collect the same amount to fund city operations as we did yesterday, and which was set through the budget process. So the relationship is not an automatic increase or doubling, let's say, in property taxes just because your house price may have doubled. So, all things being equal, if values double and everything else stays the same, what would happen in that case is that the tax rate that is applied to each property's assessed value would basically be cut in half, so that these taxes that are collected are the same amount as before. Now, where property value changes do come into play is on a relative basis. So let's use a residential property as an example. So if your property's assessed value were to increase by the same percentage as the average for the residential property class, then there'd be no impact as a result in the change in assessed value. However, let's say your specific property, increased greater or more in value than the average for that class, then you would see a greater increase or impact in your property taxes. On the flip side, let's say your property increased in value less than the average for the residential property class. In that case, you'd experience a lesser increase in property taxes. So again, it's important to note that the impact of changes in assessed value is relative, and that an increase in your property's value alone does not automatically mean that your property taxes are going up accordingly. So lots of information presented so far. Let's pause for there, perhaps, Martin, and let's see if we've had any questions come in that we can answer at this point.
Great. Thanks, Kyle. So this is kind of our first pause for questions. So just a reminder for attendees, you can submit your questions through Zoom in the Q&A box or dialogue. Kyle, we do have a couple questions at this point. You touched on this briefly. The question is, so is tax policy decided during deliberations? I think the question is meant during the budget deliberation. So maybe you can just elaborate more on the sequencing and timing of we'll say the pie versus slicing the pie.
Yeah, sure. No, so just to be very clear, the budget process and the tax policy process are completely separate. I may have skipped over that quite quickly, but certainly the budget, as I said, kind of sets the size of the pie. The tax policy process, which determines how the pie is sliced, is completely separate and outside of the budget process. So typically what you'll see is the tax policy decision points come forward to council typically in the springtime after the budget process is completed and the size of the pie is set.
Great, thanks, Kyle. Another question that we have, when will MPAC, update property values on assessments? So I think the context that was added with the question was just noting that on the latest tax bills, it still looked like an old assessment.
Great question. Great question that I wish I had a definitive answer to, but unfortunately I don't. As I alluded to in my comments, property assessments are completely controlled by MPAC, and they are completely separate and independent from the City of London. We currently have not heard anything definitive on when the next assessment will occur. MPAC has only said at this point that property assessments for the 2023 and 2024 property tax years will continue to be based on the last assessment that was done prior to COVID. So that would be the fully phased in, 2016 assessment that was done as the last assessment.
Great, thanks, Kyle. Another question has come in while we were answering those. You might have touched on this, is just how legislative changes impacts the city's budget. So the specific question that's come in is how Bill 23 affects London's budget. So I know we know what that is, but maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that and speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, so certainly. So Bill 23 was a rather large piece of legislation that came forward within the past year or so, and impacted a number of different acts and different legislation. And I think the most impactful element of Bill 23 is how it impacts development charges and the collection of development charges. And so just so for, I guess, those who are unaware, development charges are the charges that are applied to new building, new development. So there are development charges for constructing a new home, constructing a new commercial building, or that sort of thing. So with every time a building permit is pulled for a new build, there is a development charge that is charged at that point in time, and that goes to fund our growth capital budget. So that pays for a lot of the infrastructure necessary to service that growth in the city. What Bill 23 has done, in effect, is put in a number of limitations or exemptions on certain types of development. So there are exemptions, for example, for rental housing or affordable housing, not-for-profit housing, different exemptions or reductions in the amount of development charges that would normally be paid now are either no longer required to be paid at all, or there's a reduction in the amount that now needs to be paid. So obviously that's problematic for the city in the sense that, you know, we still have the costs related to build out the city with the infrastructure we need to service growth. And unfortunately, our revenue streams, one of our major revenue streams being development charges, is now going to be significantly limited or reduced due to these new limitations or exemptions that have been put in place related to development charges. So this is clearly a problem, and it's not just a problem for the City of London. It's a problem for all municipalities across the province. There's been a lot of discussion about the potential financial impacts of Bill 23 on Ontario municipalities, and there was a commitment made by the provincial government to make municipalities whole for any financial impacts that they might experience as a result of this new legislation. Obviously, the intention behind the legislation is to stimulate new housing development, get more shovels in the ground, so to speak. The government did make a commitment to make municipalities whole. However, we do not know and have not heard at this point what that looks like. So failing that, at the end of the day, there's a need for us to determine perhaps an alternate revenue source to backfill for those development charges that we are no longer able to collect legislatively. So that may result, and what you may see in the upcoming multi-year budget, are potential tax impacts associated with ensuring we have the revenues that we need in place to fund the growth infrastructure of the city. Martin?
Thanks, Kyle. And I know it's a large topic with a lot of elements. I think your answer here has triggered a couple follow-up questions. So one we have is just then around the reduction of development charges. So will there be a corresponding increase to property taxes, basically to compensate for the reduction of the development charges you were alluding to?
Well, what I will say is that at the end of the day, if your revenues have decreased, and specifically the development charges revenues, you basically have a few options. You can reduce your expenditures that rely on those revenues accordingly. So what that means is potentially slowing or reducing the pace and the amount of infrastructure that is installed in order to service growth and facilitate growth of the city. That none of the options, of course, are great, but that, of course, would have the impact of potentially slowing the pace of development and further contributing to the housing shortfalls that we have across the province. However, that is one option. You can slow potentially the pace of your expenditures. The other way to go about it is to look for other alternative funding sources to deal with the loss of revenue, the loss of development charges revenue. And ultimately, one of the city's primary sources of revenue, and quite frankly, cities are quite limited in terms of their revenue tools. We do not have the same revenue tools that the federal and provincial governments do in the form of income taxation, as an example. So we are quite limited in terms of our revenue tools, and our real only significant other revenue tool is property tax. So those are the real two options that council will have to grapple with through this upcoming budget process: is what approach to take with respect to dealing with the shortfalls in development charges revenue.
Great, thanks, Kyle. This next question I think is related or takes this a little further. So if there were a property tax impact due to Bill 23 or the DC charge changes, is the difference or the impact of that going to be communicated on tax bills? So for example, will the increase or the tax levy increase be broken out as a separate itemized item on a tax bill? As we know, some other municipalities do kind of show more breakdowns on their tax bills, things such as capital levies, etc. So the question is, will Bill 23 show up on a tax bill as a separate identified item?
Certainly. So if that is the direction that council chooses to go in terms of backfilling the development charges, the lost development charges revenue with property taxes, certainly I would envision that being something that is very clearly articulated and something that we separately quantify for taxpayers, so they know specifically what the impact of it is. What that looks like tactically in terms of whether that would be a separate line on your property tax bill, as an example, those details are still to be, I guess, worked through. But certainly we would be committed, if this were to materialize, to ensuring that the impacts of this were well articulated and well understood by the taxpayer.
Okay, thanks, Kyle. So that does exhaust all our questions at this juncture. Again, thank you for those that have submitted the questions. We'll be pausing again after we go through the next segment. So Kyle, back over to you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate the questions that were raised. Let's move on and talk about some processes that are very much related to our budget process, but might be good, useful information going forward for you as well. So start with business plans. And business plans are basically high-level overviews of the city's various kind of 90-plus services that we deliver. They outline kind of what the services do, why they do them, how they link to the strategic plan, how much it costs to deliver those services, kind of what the highlights are anticipated for those services, and potentially what challenges those services might be facing in the years ahead as well. So these are nice summary documents. They're about, typically about 3 to 4 pages in length. They provide pretty good overviews of the various services that the city provides. So I think it's good reference and good background material in advance of the release of the budget. If you're curious to understand more about what the city does and how we do it and why we do it, they're a really great reference tool. So if you're interested, business plans can be found at london.ca/budget. And you can just click on the business plans link there. And it's really, really great information to further understand kind of the various services that we deliver as a city. I will note as well that business plans are updated each year if there are material changes, whether there be big changes in strategy for that service, or big new challenges that come out, or a significant change in funding resources, that sort of thing. So definitely a good resource to check out if you're interested in learning more. Let's talk about assessment growth very quickly. So assessment growth, this is really referring to the net increase in property taxes related to new construction, whether that be new homes, new businesses. They all obviously generate new property taxes that come into the city. However, these new homes and businesses also expect to receive the same services and service levels that the existing taxpayers of the city receive. So this, we have a separate process that we've developed, which we refer to as our assessment growth process, which allows us to fund the additional volume of these services that are required to be extended to new homes and businesses. So, think about things like police and fire services, garbage collection, snow plowing in new subdivisions, new roads that need to be maintained, extending transit service, parks, maintaining new parks, new recreation facilities, that sort of thing. These are all new costs that need to be funded in order to continue delivering the services that all Londoners receive to these new homes and businesses as well. So let's watch another video, and I think this provides a really good overview of assessment growth as well.
What is assessment growth? By definition, it is new taxes from new and or expanded homes and or businesses to pay for the services they receive. In order to better understand assessment growth, you'll need to know what makes up a city's taxes. So let's look at an example of a strictly residential town and the taxes that each home pays based on each home's assessed value. When we add up all the taxes paid for this town, it totals $1,000. This money is used to pay for the town's services. During the year, our hypothetical town has some changes. This house built an addition, and this house was demolished. 3 new houses were also built. Taxes changed accordingly. Remember, assessment growth is defined as new taxes from new and or expanded homes and or businesses to pay for the services they receive. When we add up all the taxes paid for this town, the next year, it equals $1,100. In order to calculate assessment growth, we take the total tax for all the properties in our town and subtract the original tax from the start of the year. This gives us a year-over-year growth of $100. That's 10%. This is our assessment growth. You may be saying, great, extra cash. It is important to note that this is not new money that the town can spend. Let's summarize. When new homes are built or expanded in the town, existing municipal services must be extended. The 10% new tax revenue generated by these homes is used to fund the extension of the town's operating budget to provide these services. And that is what we mean by assessment growth.
So to summarize, I think the really key point from that video is that assessment growth is not new money. The new homes and the new businesses in the city expect the exact same level of service as the existing homes and businesses. And because of that very important point, we have separated our assessment growth process from our budget process. So requests for assessment growth funding from those service areas that may have growth-related pressures or growth-related costs to extend services, they need to submit business cases to us for those costs. And our assessment growth policy outlines the eligible forms of growth costs that are acceptable to access new assessment growth funding. So we typically take a separate report, usually in February or March, likely March this year. We take a separate report to council that outlines how those additional assessment growth revenues that we've received for the year are going to be allocated to the services that are experiencing growth pressures. So this really ensures that funding is available to support growth costs and that there doesn't have any resulting erosion of service quality over time based on new development that occurs within the city. All right. So we spent a lot of time talking about how a budget is developed, but it's important as well that we keep council and the community apprised of how we're progressing against the budget as well. So we have a separate budget monitoring process to do that, and we report to council on the city's budget position twice a year through separate committee reports that outline the status of the city's operating and capital budgets. So these reports are as of June 30th and December 31st each year. The mid-year report, the June 30th report, typically goes forward in September. The year-end report, as of December 31st, usually goes to council in April of each year. So Martin, why don't we pause there before we get into the upcoming dates for the 2024 to 2027 multi-year budget. Any other questions that have come in?
Yes, thank you. So just a reminder to all those that have joined us, you can submit your questions to the Q&A box through the Zoom app. So we have a question, and I think it's linking something from the previous section to the business plan. So the question is around how much detail or to what level are the business plans available? So I think when we were talking about service programs, groupings, and services, can you link that kind of hierarchy to the business plans?
Yeah, so generally, I'll speak in generalities here. Generally, the business plans are done at the service level. So there are quite a number of business plans that you'll find on our website. They are very much at the service level. So obviously, that's done intentionally because you can have a number of very different services within any particular service grouping. I showed you the protective services service program as an example earlier on, and you had police, fire, bylaw enforcement, animal services, all of course very different services. So because they're so different, we do the business plans at the service level to really be able to tell a very unique and distinct story and outline the real specific challenges and game plans for those specific services. So that's my long-winded way of answering your question, Martin, to say that the business plans are done at the service level.
Great, Kyle. Thank you. And one more question at this point in time. So if I have a question about a service or the business plans, who do I best contact? The budget office, the service, or Service London?
Yeah, so you're probably your best bet. And the great thing about the business plans as you're reading them is that you'll find at the very bottom of each business plan, there's a specific contact person outlined for that specific service. So if you have specific questions about a service based on the business plan you're reviewing, I'd encourage you to reach out to that person who's noted as the contact in that business plan, and their contact information is included as well. So it's fairly straightforward to reach out.
Great, thanks, Kyle. That concludes the questions we have at this point in time, so we can move on to the next section.
Excellent. All right. So the next section really gets into what's ahead. So let's talk about some key dates and what we're embarking on over the next few months as we tackle the 2024 to 2027 multi-year budget process. So the official kickoff of the process, I guess you'd say, is on December the 12th. So that's when the draft budget will be released at the Strategic Priorities and Policy Committee. That's happening at 4 o'clock. We then are taking a bit of a hiatus, I guess you'd say, until the next, I guess, official meeting, which happens on January the 29th. That is a budget public participation meeting. There's an opportunity to come and provide your input on the budget. I will speak a little bit more about that in a couple minutes, but that meeting on January the 29th starts at 4 o'clock here at City Hall. We then have 8 days set aside at this point for potential budget deliberations in February, starting on February 1st, and the last one being February 23rd at this point, if needed. We then have a second budget public participation meeting that's being held on February 27th. The intention behind that public participation meeting would be an opportunity to, once council has made some decisions through their budget deliberations, gives an opportunity to perhaps weigh in on some of those decisions that council has made. So that's why we have a second public participation meeting in the process as well. And we're ultimately aiming for final approval of the multi-year budget in early March. Now, I also want to mention something else that might introduce a little bit of a wrinkle, perhaps, into the city's budget process this year. So over the course of the past year, what is called strong mayor legislation was extended to 49 of the larger Ontario municipalities, London being one of them, of course. I'm not going to get into all the details of that legislation here today. You no doubt have far better things to be doing on a Saturday morning, but did want to highlight just a few key points because it may impact our budget process this year. So the legislation says that the mayor is to propose a budget by February 1st, or failing that, if he does not, council then takes responsibility for preparing and adopting a budget if the mayor does not do so by February 1st. I'll note that the legislation does not provide for a mechanism for the mayor to quote unquote opt out of this new process. So effectively, if a budget is being proposed on or before February 1st, it is by legislation, it is the mayor's budget. It is only if it is prepared or proposed, after February 1st, does this not apply. So I just wanted to note that the new legislation does include very defined processes for council amendments to the mayor's budget, and also includes potential mayoral veto powers as well, and then also processes for council to override the mayor's veto as well. So it's very technical, very specific, very legalese, I'd say. So I'm not going to get into it too much today, but I did want to mention it. I think the really important thing to note out of all of this is that the draft budget that we are releasing on December 12th is the draft budget prepared by Civic Administration. I want to be very clear about that. It is not the mayor's budget. It is simply a draft budget prepared by Civic Administration and being released on December 12th to facilitate public engagement, input, and commentary on the budget. Okay, earlier on, I promised some information on how you can find more specifics about the budget once it's been released. So let's talk about those upcoming events and those upcoming opportunities to find out more. The first one is a budget open house that we are hosting here at City Hall on January 10th. This will be on the second floor of City Hall, which is very accessible to the public. That'll be occurring from 4 o'clock in the afternoon until 8 o'clock. Please feel free to come out. It'll be a very informal drop-in style session where you can come and learn more, get your questions answered, talk about specific elements of the budget more. So really encourage you to attend the budget open house on January the 10th. The budget team is also intending to hold a series of 6 pop-up events in the month of January. So we're going to be out and about in the community at various city facilities, giving folks the opportunity to chat about the budget there as well. So our first one is on January the 13th. We'll be at the South London Community Centre from 10 till 12. Our next one is January the 16th, again from 10 till 12. We'll be at the East Lyons Community Centre that day. On January the 17th, we'll be at the Canada Games Aquatic Centre from 5:30 to 7:30. We'll be at the Kiwanis Senior Centre on January 19th from 11 to 1. On January 22nd, we'll be at the Stony Creek Community Centre from 4 till 6. And finally, on the 25th, we will be at the now startech.com, formerly Bostwick Community Centre, from 10 until 12 as well. So if you happen to be at these facilities around that time, or even in close proximity or in the area, strongly encourage you to drop by, see us. Happy to chat about the budget process with you at these locations. So if there's one thing I really want to leave you with today, it is the importance of getting involved and providing your feedback in the budget process. What you like, what you don't like, the more perspectives that are received, the better the ultimate decisions that council makes are going to be. So it's really, really, really important that you get involved and you provide your input in the budget process. So how can you do that? Well, obviously the first step is to review the budget information once it's released next month. This will be online in December. It will be both on our multi-year budget website at london.ca/budget. It will also be on our Get Involved webpage as well. I've included the link on screen here, getinvolved.london.ca/budget. Once you've had the opportunity to review and consider the budget details, we'd really encourage you to submit your feedback directly to your counselor. If you don't know who your counselor is, you can visit the link that I've included here on the screen. You can find out who represents your ward and what their contact information is. Your other alternative, of course, if you don't want to reach out directly to your counselor, is you can also attend a public participation meeting. And I mentioned the 2 ppm opportunities that we have scheduled. That is your chance to address all of council, not just your specific counselor. So it's really your choice whether you want to engage directly with your specific counselor or all counselors. But certainly the public participation meetings provide the opportunity to address all of council sitting as the budget committee. I've included a link here on screen where you can find out more about public participation meetings and how to participate in those. So why is providing your feedback to your specific counselor or to counselors in general, why is that important? Why, you might be saying, why can't I just call you, Kyle, and give you my input or feedback on the budget? Well, I love chatting with all of you, but unfortunately, it is council who are the ultimate decision makers on the budget. So it is really imperative that you are providing your feedback directly to the decision makers on what you like or dislike about the budget. So it's really, really important that they hear from you and they can incorporate your input and your feedback as they're going through the budget deliberation process. So that is all of the slides we have for today. We have included just our contact information here on this last slide. So if you have any questions about the budget process, or the budget itself when it's released in December, you can contact us through these methods. budget@london.ca is always great. That email is distributed to a number of folks, so we endeavor to respond to emails that come into that as quickly as we can. So with that, Martin, I will check in with you and see if there's any other questions that have come in.
Great, thanks, Kyle. So again, just a reminder, you can submit your questions to the Q&A function on Zoom, and this is kind of our final segment of today. So this is the last chance for questions that will be answered at this session. But of course, as Kyle's mentioned, our contact information is on screen, so we're always happy to answer your questions after the fact as well. The one question we have is going back a little bit to the strong mayor. So the question is, does the mayor functionally set the budget? Should I be giving my feedback directly to the mayor?
It's a great question, Martin, because it's a very new process this year, and lots of kind of unknowns with it. So great question. What I would say is that the legislation, the Strong Mayors legislation, provides a very good process with very specific timelines to have the budget proposed and approved. So the legislation is very clear that obviously a budget that is proposed on or before February 1st is the mayor's budget. Otherwise, the responsibility for preparing and approving the budget rests with council. So even if, though, the mayor does propose his budget on or before February 1st, the mayor's budget can still very much be amended by council with majority support. And again, without getting into all of the details, there are also abilities for the mayor to veto council's amendments, and then for council to override the mayor's veto. So at the end of the day, the power still rests with council. There are still mechanisms within the legislation for council to change the decisions of the mayor and that sort of thing. So no, it's not just the mayor who is setting the budget. Council is very much still the ultimate decision makers.
Thanks, Kyle. Sorry there, the mute button didn't work on me. The questions come in around whether this presentation or video will be available after the fact. So I can take this one. We have recorded and are recording this session, and yes, we will be posting a copy of it on the Get Involved website. So again, that link is on screen, so it's there for future reference and or sharing with others that might have not been able to join us live here today. Kyle, we have one more question at this time. Ultimately, when everything's said and done, and I think it's referencing back to the budgets decided on March 5th, but when will I have my tax bill? When will I ultimately know what the tax impact may be of any decisions to me as a taxpayer?
Yeah, no, great question. So we're kicking off the budget process next month. Council will be deliberating the budget through February, again, aiming for approval in early March. And then going back to our earlier conversation, once the budget is set, then the tax policy discussions begin. So again, as I alluded to earlier, tax policy is typically a springtime conversation or decision point for council. So what will happen is that you will get interim tax billings towards the end of the spring, and then once the budget and the tax policy decisions have been made, final tax bills are then issued at that point once kind of the final decisions of the budget and the tax policy are noted. So those final tax bills are provided in advance of the June tax installment deadline. So that's kind of a rough timeline of when things will be finally wrapped up. Martin?
Thank you, Kyle. So we have a comment, but maybe I'll rephrase it as a question. So I think it touched on a number of things we talked about. Bill 23, some of the videos, and just speaking about how the municipal government works with different levels of government. How does one communicate or make it known to other levels of government what's happening or what the impact is having at a municipal level?
Yeah, so certainly there's a role for the city to play in that, and we do play an active role in that. Obviously, our mayor works very closely with our government relations team to ensure that the impacts of various things on the City of London are very well known by other levels of government. We also have a number of councillors who sit on various committees or groups that have fairly direct lines of sight and lines of input into the federal and provincial decision makers as well. So there are plenty of opportunities for the City of London's kind of needs and challenges and pressures to be communicated through groups like AMO, which is the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, as an example. Lots of opportunities to ensure that our voice is heard through those groups as well. However, on a more individual level, I think all of you have an opportunity to do that as well. And I would say the best way to do that is through your local representative, whether that be your local member of parliament or member of provincial parliament. If you have specific concerns about how things that are happening at the federal or provincial levels are impacting the municipality, certainly I encourage you to contact your MP or MPP as well. Martin?
Thank you for that, Kyle. So it does look like we've exhausted the current list of submitted questions. So I believe that brings us to the conclusion of today's session. Once again, our office contact details are on screen. If anything else comes to mind, do not hesitate to reach out. We're here to help and try to answer your questions or guide you in the right direction. So thank you for your time today, and we wish you all a pleasant rest of your day. Thank you so much for joining us today. Take care.